and it's my pleasure to be chairing this session, which I think really should be called Brexit, what happens next. But when we printed the programmes, we couldn't, of course, call it that because we didn't necessarily expect that outcome. And from the round of applause that Tyler Cowen got, I think it's clear that there are some strong views on that issue within the audience, which will be good to tease out. I've got all the complicated names to introduce, but I'll do my best. On my immediate left is Diego Zuluaga, who is the Financial Services Research Fellow at the IEA, and he writes on regulation in banking, regulation of platform and technology companies, and is also head of research for EPICENTER, which is a pan-European think tank made up of a group of free market think tanks within Europe. In the middle is Dr. Mikko Arevuo, who is Principal Lecturer and Head of Regent University's Postgraduate Management Programme. He's got over 30 years' experience teaching and researching in corporate and investment banking, consulting and academia. He's got a BA from the University of Michigan and an MBA and a PhD from Cranfield University in the UK. And on my extreme left is Yioryos Makedonis, who is a senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, London, and primarily teaches mathematics. And he also teaches financial economics and is a director of the MSc in banking program. And perhaps he'd be able to widen the discussion out to some of the other problems which exist within the EU, so we don't get too insular. Now, I'm just going to ask the panelists one or two questions, and then I'll throw it open to the floor. So I want to start by saying, since the referendum, the Remain camp has sort of taken the position that it would like an action replay. And there have been some pretty unsavoury things going on. The Polish club in London was not far from here, was daubed with graffiti a few days ago. I've heard stories of Polish children in schools having groups of children standing around them chanting, "Leave, leave, leave," and so on. The pro-free trade, pro-migration voice in the Conservative Party seems to be quite muted as well. What do you think? Do you think that the Brexit vote has been a victory for socialism and protectionism, or a victory for liberalism and the free market? Diego, first.
Well, I think it has to do with the general climate of opinion that we live in. In other circumstances, say if the referendum had taken place in the 1980s or 1990s, when there was a clear consensus for free trade and for liberalization, I think probably we would have seen a Brexit program that was much more what free marketeers would like. But in this current context, where not just in Europe, but all over the world, you have a backlash against globalization, you have a very strong anti-migration feeling all over Europe, it was bound to happen that the platform that would seem to be carrying the day, especially right after the referendum, would be one that is anti-globalist. And indeed, if we had looked at the Leave campaign during the referendum, those are the arguments that they emphasized. They didn't talk about globalist opportunities. There was some element of that. I mean, to their credit, they did say that they wanted to maximize trading relationships from the UK of the UK with third countries. But they didn't focus on that. They focused on curbing the number of migrants. There was also scaremongering on the Remain side, of course. And I think that's contributed also to the mood of uncertainty and fear that has followed it. But I think it has to do with the direction of travel of the policy climate.
Yours.
I think there was a problem with not only misinformation, but at certain times completely lack of proper, appropriate information by both parties. It ended up in sloganeering and personal accusations. I don't think when it comes to such serious issues, matters not only for ourselves, but for the future generations, it was a major lack of seriousness that I blame both parties.
And Mikko.
Well, I voted Leave as a Finnish Brit on the basis that I felt that the EU is an accountable entity and an inward-looking entity that will hinder in the long term the global perspectives of the European economy. But let me go back into what Philip said in terms of this racist and xenophobic behavior that has now emerged. I was very disappointed by the tone of the campaign from both sides. I think it was highly destructive. But I don't think that the emergence of this type of behavior is a emergence of sort of latent racism in this country by any means. Look, every society has pond life, and we have our pond life as well. And if one looks at the truly racist party that existed in this country, the BNP, in the last general election, their vote went down by 99%. The one infamous poster that was also evident during the campaign was taken down after a public outcry. So, again, what is happening, I do attribute that to the tone of the campaign. And I certainly did not vote to leave on the basis of immigration. I voted for democratic governance that I feel is dampened by the EU as a construct.
I'm now going to ask you all a slightly different question. So, Mikko first. If you were the negotiator for the UK, what would you try and achieve? In other words, what do you think should happen next in terms of Britain's relationship with Europe?
Well, the first thing what we need to be very clear about is that we need to have a clear negotiating strategy in place. And what we need to do is that we have a national interest here. We need to safeguard our democratic institutions. We also need to safeguard our trading arrangements. And we also need to safeguard the financial structures that we have in place in this country. So whatever is coming from the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, and I refer to the very unhelpful comment by the President Juncker, who said that there will be consequences. Well, he is a bureaucrat, he is not elected. I believe that the elected politicians in the European countries who are accountable to their electorates will take a rational approach to the negotiations. And I don't think that we have an either-or situation here. I think that over a period of time, we'll reach some sort of agreement in the middle.
Do you think it'll be the European Economic Area, or is that what you would aspire to?
Well, that is my thinking that we will be heading.
And Yioryos, if you were on the other side of the table, say representing the Greek government, what would you want to try to achieve for the European Union?
Thank you very much, but I don't think that...
well, representing any government.
But I don't think that the Greek government carries any particular weight at the moment.
The French government.
I would prefer if you had asked me if I was Angela Merkel, something like that.
Yeah.
I think she has already sent the signal that she is not on the same side of the table, carrying the same opinion like Mr. Juncker. She's prepared for patient, long, maybe sluggish negotiations. And that's what I would have done if you have asked me the same question like Nico. Prepare for long, protracted negotiations, and keep in mind that yes, 52 out of 100 voted for Brexit, but there are another 48 that they wanted to remain. And when you are representing the nation, the union, the state, you'll have to think about these crucial issues, questions, the 48 as well.
And Diego, what do you think will happen?
I think we will end up with quite a positive agreement made. I don't know what the timetable is going to look like. I wouldn't necessarily rely on Angela Merkel's comments just after the referendum for guidance as to what her stance is going to be, because she's very tactical. She's always been on any issue, you know, even with the Greek bailout, she's made contradictory comments very often. So I think I wouldn't take that as an indication of what the stance is going to be over the long term. I think it is quite clear what the UK needs to do. I mean, it's clear, it's easy to express. You want to preserve the good bits about EU membership without the bad bits. So you want to get rid of the bureaucracy, you want to get rid of the political meddling, because the sovereignty issue was very important to the UK electorate. But you want to preserve free trade, and I think free movement as well. Free movement, I don't know how you can come to an arrangement where free movement from the EU could be preserved at this stage. I think one should do everything one can to do so. EEA membership would seem to necessitate it. But free trade at least, and access to the single market, meaning the current status that the UK has with regard to the single market broadly, I think are good ideas. The caveat to this all, of course, is that the EU is not a stable construct at the moment. It's very much in flux. And so even the EEA might not exist as we know it today by the time the EU has evolved into something new, particularly the Eurozone. And so the UK's new relationship is going to be shaped alongside that process of either increased integration or, well, God forbid, but chaotic unraveling, or perhaps decentralization of powers of some sort, which is what people like Nicolas Sarkozy, former president of France, are calling for.
Okay, so let's take some questions from the floor. Yeah, gentleman there.
First of all, thank you for all your positions. I was wondering actually on the last point that Philip mentioned and that Diego commented on, that the EU is maybe not stable and that it is in fact in flux. How do you think the next few years play out for Greece and potentially for Italy? There's been a lot of murmurings regarding, maybe Italy having a Greek problem, if you will, and even the five-star movement in Italy asking for Euro 2, a southern euro, a splitting of the currency zone. How do you think that plays in to the future game, and how does the Austrian rerun potentially affect all of that as well? Will there even be an EU to leave, or is the whole structure changing as we speak?
So, Yioryos, what do you think the future is for the Eurozone then?
Earlier on, I think it was Professor Cowan that mentioned, be terrified. I'm not that pessimist. It's not going to be easy. In Greece, I would prefer to move out of the Eurozone, but the problem would have been who to lead the Greek out of something like that, because the question is, do you trust the Greeks? You do not. It's like their statistics. I do not know it is the answer, but there are going to be opportunities for winners, and there are going to be costs for losers. And that was something that it was lost in the last 6 weeks in the argument between the Remain and the Brexit. Nobody came out to say that if we vote for this, these are going to be the expected gains and these are going to be the expected losses. Here's your information, vote accordingly. And Mikko, in Finland, you've of course had the rise, perhaps some fall since then, of a very Eurosceptic party. So, no, again, what do you think the future is for the continent of Europe, if you like?
Well, I think the gentleman there also referred to the Austrian situation that is coming up again. My concern is that if we are going to see a faster integration of the EU policies and structures, then we'll have an electorate that will become increasingly unstable and Eurosceptic. And that is my fear. The Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries are very liberal democracies with long traditions. And what I'm seeing when I'm observing from the outside into the Nordic countries is that the discourse, the debate is hardening. And I find that incredibly worrying. So again, going back to my first comment, that the elected politicians, at some point, they will have to realize that where does one draw the line between the European community, the structures, and your electorate? Because the worst thing can happen is that we can have these populist parties coming into power. And I think that is a very dangerous road to travel.
Brief comment, Diego?
Yeah, I would say that I'm very much against the breakup of the euro, primarily because I don't think the euro has any fault in the economic problems that we see in Europe right now. It's a matter of domestic policy. You have very rigid product and labor markets in many countries, and that's what is really doing harm to these economies. I come from Spain, and people always raise the issue of 25% unemployment in Spain, and they associate it with the euro. And what they forget to mention is that we had 25% unemployment in Spain in 1977, we had 25% unemployment in Spain in 1994, so it has to do with the impact of shocks and the very elastic nature of unemployment upwards when you have shocks in a country with very rigid labor markets. In terms of populism, and I think it is a very relevant point about the rise of populism as a result of a lack of responsiveness from the European institutions. I think it has to do primarily with the fact that the EU is not seen as something permanent. And the moment you have some constitutional arrangement whereby, for example, the Eurozone became some form of federal state, then these protest parties are no longer about undermining the whole order, but rather have to live within that system. And they will be bound by constitutional provisions, very much in the way that Donald Trump, say, if he were to be elected, would be bound by constitutional provisions in the United States.
Can I just come in for one?
Okay, briefly,
one? Yeah. Following on the structural problems that some of these southern European countries have, I don't think that scrapping the euro is going to be the panacea. I don't think that will solve the issues in some of the economies. I think there are more structural issues that also have to be done. Mm-hmm. So just getting rid of the euro is not going to be the answer.
Okay. Yeah, gentleman, right at the back.
This question is similar to the last question, but what do you think the future of the EU will be if Turkey joins? Because that's now on the agenda.
I just missed the end of that question. The future of the EU?
If Turkey joins.
Okay. Interesting.
Don't ask the Greek about Turkey.
Well, you're together in NATO, aren't you?
That's where I was about to start. 10 years ago, when Erdogan came to the government, Turkey was being promoted from its Western allies as the ideal Islamic democracy, and that was the model being promoted to Iraq and Syria. Nowadays, it is not the same. Is a member of NATO, and we are, at the same time that we are talking, NATO is conducting war games, the biggest, the longest since 1999. And over there are British soldiers along Turkish soldiers. There is a contradiction. I cannot see why you cannot let this soldier in 2 years' time cross the border here to UK, or the other way around.
Diego, you're in favour of deepening, are you in favour of widening as well? Worth bearing in mind with the Greek-Turkey issue that when Spain joined the European Union, that meant that there were two sovereign states within the EU which had constitutional territorial claims on UK territory, right. Ireland and Spain. So we've been here before.
I'm in favour of Turkey joining, and also because I think it would bring a lot of cultural benefits in the sense that it would be much easier to have a good policy stance on the situation of immigrant Muslims, for example, in European countries if you had a Muslim country involved. And if you had deep relations that within the European Council. I'm in favour of deepening of the EU in some ways, but I'm also in favour of overlapping structures. So I like having some countries in Schengen but not in the Euro, some countries in the EU but neither in the Euro nor in Schengen, some countries in a customs union without adopting any of the regulations, some countries having some fixed exchange rate with the Euro, because I think that leads to less centralization, which I'm generally against, and also because it allows for better experimentation and it makes the EU more attractive. We want countries like Turkey to join, emerging markets that have high average growth rates. We don't want just stagnant economies to be part of it, and increasingly the EU has been an unattractive club to join. So I do think that the variety just in the size of Turkey would more than compensate for, say, the loss of the UK, just population-wise and I think in potential growth.
And Mikko, what would the Finns think of the Russians joining?
Well, I think that's very yes. Well, exactly. I think that is not going to happen at all. I'm not even quite sure how to answer that question. I think that's a very outlandish question. But I say this. When we're looking at members joining this club, we are assuming that we are creating some sort of superstructures that will allow us to manage these various different cultures, different economies, different backgrounds, and so on, under a single umbrella. And I was thinking about coming here this morning. I was just having a conversation with my mother-in-law last night, and I said, well, I'd rather be a good neighbor than being forced into a marriage where I have to then deal with 25, 37 mother-in-laws at the same time, if I can use that analogy. I think that there are ways of creating cooperation that is beyond or without these types of structures.
Okay, any further questions? Yeah, gentleman right at the front. Let's take two what will be final questions, and the lady at the back, yeah.
Out of pure curiosity, I'd like to know what the panel's thoughts are on the outlook for Scotland's position in the UK and the EU going forwards following Brexit.
So the outlook for?
Scotland's position
Scotland.
in the UK and the EU.
That's a good question, yeah. And right at the back.
My question is very similar. So what is the economic outlook and for Britain? Because, banking industry, the stake and the manufacturing of oil is in Scotland. So how can Britain be better after Brexit? How can Britain be better in terms of economic and economy-wise?
Yeah. Okay, so what will happen to the Union and how can Britain be better after Brexit? Mikko.
Well, let me take the last part of the question first, and I think the lady asked about the banking industry. One of the first things that has to be on top of the agenda is to ensure these passporting rights of this industry, and I think that will happen. In terms of the Scottish question, I was very baffled to hear the First Minister. She was not shy coming forward, calling press conferences and visiting Brussels. Scotland cannot have it both ways. If they want to be part of the EU, and then they would probably have to take on euro. They cannot be in a position that they will have a central bank in London and trade on sterling and have their EU and independence. I just don't see how that will work. But as I said, I am not able to give a better answer, but just very big question marks.
Diego, Spain is important in this issue, isn't it? Because we could actually get a situation where Scotland votes for independence, England, Wales and Northern Ireland join the European Economic Area, and then Spain vetoes Scotland joining the European Union because of its Catalonia problem. Mm-hmm. Therefore, Scotland ends up completely out of it altogether, and we're kind of half back in it again. Yeah. So, what do you think?
I think that is the worst case scenario, but a very similar scenario would be perhaps the best case scenario, which is one in which you have rump UK, so everything but Scotland, not joining the EEA, which seems to be what people outside of Scotland want, and then you have an independent Scotland that is vetoed by Spain from joining the EU, but can effectively do the same thing it wants to do as part of the EEA, and then it could have some sort of currency standard or, a sterlingization of its economy, which is what most Scots seem to also want and would perhaps provide the least disruption. In terms of the second question on banking, I actually, there's a lot of talking about the passporting issue and the marketing of financial services products in different countries, but I actually think that the cost of having subsidiaries, and this is something, Philip, you and I have discussed sometimes, is actually not that big of a deal. And I think the employment impact that is much vaunted of losing those passporting rights is actually not going to be as much. You need the clearinghouse perhaps to be in the Eurozone, for example, but a lot of the trades can still be conducted in London, and London has a lot of other attractions. So even though I'm a Remainer, I think we need to be honest about the impact on financial services in that sense, and I don't think it's very major unless you have a turn away from relatively beneficial regulation. And just as a last addendum on what the UK needs to do, basically the same it would have needed to do had it voted to remain, which is liberalise planning laws, reform healthcare, try to address the supply side in many labour and products markets less labour markets, but product markets such as childcare and so on, that are really raising the cost of living and making people vastly worse off. But it comes to the basic point about Brexit, which is that the UK's problems were always domestic. It wasn't the EU, one way or the other, that was at the heart of it.
The R in our UK stands for rest rather than rump, by the way.
Oh, right.
Yioryos.
It seems to me that both for UK, Britain, and banking, the main problem is what this election has done to the image of banking and the image of UK to the rest of the world. Yes, I agree with Diego that passport, it is too much on the news. I don't think that it is that important. But banking is based on trust and confidence. And when you are saying, I'm moving out of that union, then the banking world will not react positively. With regards to the UK and the Britain, the major wound is that called Britannia does not exist anymore. And that was a major, I think, magnet for young people to come here to UK, especially to London. It is not going to be an immediate effect, but I think in the medium run, 4 or 5 years down the road, London is not going to be the same as it used to be for the last 10, 15 years. Just to mention that there are a lot of candidates, as we speak, that they are queuing for gaining this kind of image, both in terms of education, tourist, and banking destination. Amsterdam is there, and Paris as well. For the last 7 days, they are advertising heavily on the Financial Times about come to us.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time, although perhaps some of the panellists will be around during the break. I'd like to thank you for your questions and the panellists for their excellent and insightful answers. Thank you.
Thank you.